to really start off, I know this is one of the most popular topics. Everyone, when I'm seeing all the signups, they're talking about like, how do I get my first customer and stuff like that. But before I get into the questions, I will try and leave more time for questions. I'd like to have each of you quickly introduce yourself within like a minute or so.
Can start. Nicole Baer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Carta. I've been there for about 2 years. How many in this room are familiar with Carta already? All right. I love that. We provide cap table software as part of our business for founders. So shameless plug. If you are under $1 million in funding and fewer than 25 stakeholders on your cap table, we have a free product called Launch, and you can go download that and stop paying your law firms to do it for you. It's a really good thing. Essentially, Carta provides a broad range of services and software to private capital. So we have about 60,000 founders and startups on our cap table side of our business. About 8,000 venture firms use Carta for fund administration. Another 3,000 private equity firms use us for their portco cap tables or for their fund administration. And we recently launched into the institutional investor market with a new acquisition we made of a limited partner product. So we are the end-to-end platform connecting private capital, which I think is probably, I'm right with the right folks here today.
Hi, I'm Angela. I lead enterprise marketing over at Zapier. Any of you Zapier users? Hopefully. Cool. Samantha. I previously was a founder, so I went through YC back in summer 21. We were acquired at the beginning of this year. I'm now at Zapier, and I live over in San Francisco.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Wong, Chief Marketing Officer at Relic. We are an intelligent observability platform, and we work with startups all the way up to, really large companies like Nike and Nordstrom. A little bit about my background: over 20 years of marketing experience. Have done startups all the way up to billion-dollar businesses like Relic.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for your quick intros. So I would like to just cut to the chase, talk about a topic, which is go-to-market. We'll focus on go-to-market first. So love to get your definitions of what exactly is go-to-market and what are the key aspects of go-to-market that early stage founders, maybe pre-revenue in that sense, should focus on. And we'll talk about what happens after they get revenue after that. So any one of you, just take a shot. Feel free.
You could start. I guess the good news is there's no answer to what go-to-market is. It's a very capacious sort of category by nature. Go-to-market can be as simple as it's sales and marketing, or it can be essentially everything other than R&D, product and engineering. I think the best definition for go-to-market that can be inclusive of all companies is if you kind of think about an infinite relay race between R&D and go-to-market. Essentially, product leads off, hands the baton off to go-to-market. They run it, all the way through sales and post-sales, customer success, retention, et cetera. And then they start the race again by giving that input back into the product team for them to develop better products. So there's really a strong connectivity between the R&D groups and go-to-market. But traditionally, you'll basically see the commercial functions are in go-to-market, but you'll also see strategy, operations, pricing and packaging, et cetera, in there too.
My friends over at Go-to-Market Partners is a research firm, and they have a nice definition that covers like the who, what, when, where of go-to-market. But I think the really simple version is I just think all the component parts within an organization. That could be an organization as small as 2 people, 1 person, up through thousands to get a product to market or get your services to market.
I tried to think what else to add. That was pretty comprehensive. It's really taking your product to market, right? And so when I think about that, it's similar to what you said, Nicole. It's pretty much everything outside of building the product is how I think about it. But I also think that, for founders, like you're going to be wearing different hats. And so, when you are building the product, you have to understand your market. So that's kind of what I anchor on, understanding the market first.
So let's double on that. Given that we should be focusing on the market as a first step, what are some of the tactics that you guys can provide advice on these founders here to figure out their market? I mean, maybe one tactic from each of you would be good. Feel free to go ahead.
Go ahead, Angela.
So the question is tactics to get customers, to get Your product to market, or was
The question would be, how do you find your market in that sense? Like, how to get started finding your market?
Yeah, so I mean, this covers like very, very early days if you're a founder. I feel like I've got or had a cheap trick, and I use that now. I use it as a founder and a solopreneur. I used it when we were venture backed. I used it now as a marketing lead, which is basically co-build, like co-creation. I think co-creation with your customers, with your market, is the best way to do this. Now, there's a lot of ways to do it, but this dates back to if anyone's read Robert Cialdini's book on influence. Co-creation builds unity. So I think if you can actually think about not scaling, not having some go-to-market scale operation, like all that stuff is nonsense when you're early days. But instead, just figure out like this one person, how do I make them super happy, or how do I make this small group really happy with my product? And co-create works really well.
That's awesome. Nicole, you had something to add?
I would just, we call them design partners. We have them at Carta. Anytime we're starting up something new, we have design partners that kind of allow us to test something and, get things right, get things wrong with them. And, we're a $500 million ARR company, and we still use the same first principles we did when we were less than $1 million.
I think one thing I would add here, if you're a first-time founder, I've worked for several first-time founders, and I promise you, for the first 2 years, we're probably selling to 200 of their friends and family and their network. So definitely leverage your network. If you're coming out of an incubator, for example, right, just really hone in on the problem you're solving and pitch it to everyone you know. That's usually where it starts.
I just have to double click on what she said. I've also founded 2 advisory firms, and my first customers were 100% in my network. 100%. So the people that are here with you today, your network, they will also be your first design partners and probably your first customers too.
One more thing to add. These days, I think just social media and influencers, I mean, it's just prolific. So you got to get on channels like that too. Obvious.
Yeah, I know we were talking about social media, quickly before this, where I've been seeing a trend that a lot of younger founders like yourself are like building in public. They're having very active on LinkedIn, on Twitter and stuff like that. They're just letting the world know what they're building. And used to work more for consumers, but now you're seeing more B2B enterprise companies doing that. How would you guys recommend the founders to get started in framing the right personal branding, or getting started on starting that whole motion up and building in public? To add on a little more color is like, what should they actually show when they're building in public, right? Like, what do the public want to know?
Okay, I can start. This is actually age-old, although I've seen new permutations of this. It's what I call the formula of the origin story, like your Uber why. Like, why did you start a company? Like, why are you trying to solve this problem, right? And really doing storytelling in micro segments and just putting it out there. You're going to have to test, so on and so forth. But it's been pretty amazing to see, today's workforce and everyone just really nailing that.
I mean, I think building in public does a couple of things at once. And I, as a founder, as a scrappy founder, I love finding things that do double, triple, quadruple duty, right? So it's helping you find your audience. The algorithm now on TikTok, right, is not based on your existing audience or demand. It's based on, are you talking about something that this particular very niche person is interested in, and it will help you find them, right? So it helps you find your audience. It helps you sell and actually close. It helps you build a brand. It helps you build your own audience. So all of those things at once, I think, make it a really ripe time for approaching things in a built in public way.
Yeah, and it's a time for authenticity. I think the best founders celebrate their wins and their fails on social. That's part of building in public too. And that makes for great social content.
Old framework of B2B and B2C is a bit outdated. So I've been talking a lot about B2H, which is business to human. So think about it. When you're scrolling through, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, and how delightful that experience is in terms of purchasing, you got to make your story or your content super compelling to the consumer, even if it's a business sale.
I also, maybe like a almost counterpoint to all of this is, I don't think there's any should. So we're like, wow, building in public works so well. And you might be sitting there being like, well, shit, I don't want to go sit and talk to my TikTok, like my phone. Maybe you're like, and maybe it's a fine line between pushing yourself to do something out of your comfort zone and to do something that is like natural for you. So anyway, I don't think there's a should. I don't think you have to do it, but I do think taking a little bit of a leap is and doing something like this is like now's the time.
How important is differentiation? Because like everybody's just post the same stuff on social media. Like, is it still effective, or do you think someone needs to have like a creative content that strikes eyeballs and stuff like that? And I think I also want to double upon a point that Angela made earlier, where you suggested TikTok, right? But there are some platforms like LinkedIn that relies a lot on like the followers that you already have. How would you recommend founders that don't have that following to get started in that sense?
I mean, it's like I go back to YC principles and it's like just ship, right? Launched. You don't have just one launch. You can do tens of launches. You can do hundreds of launches. You can literally do thousands of launches and nobody remembers. So I think that just getting out there is really, really important. And interestingly, I have heard as someone who posts sometimes cringe content on LinkedIn myself, I have heard that the algorithm has been shifting even on LinkedIn where it is slightly less audience based and more TikTok style. So I think just get started.
That's definitely true. And I would also say, I mean, obviously trend jacking. Like if there's a trend happening on TikTok, like jump on it. This is the easiest way for you to be a part of the conversation.
Think there are a lot of communities on LinkedIn, with varying degrees of activity, but I would start there too, right? And just, I call it the value exchange. What value are providing in exchange for someone's attention? So when you're on these communities, right, it's not about selling, it's just some thought leadership, right? Provide some value and then they'll start following you.
You also asked about, does it have to be super creative? And does it have to be really differentiated? I think that is a great like mental trap to fall into to then just not get started. And sure, like maybe you need it to be eventually like you're going to find your differentiation points, but it's a big market out there, depending on what space you're in. Like there is room for a unique spin, and you probably have a more unique spin than you think. So I would not obsess over like I got to be different. It's a trap I certainly fell into as a founder. Like I got to do the different thing. Well, actually, sometimes you're going to then find a thing that's not as compelling because you're so obsessed with being unique.
I would say that I think just be careful about self-serving content. I can tell you that that does not work particularly well. It will be at sort of the bottom of your best performing social content. If it comes across as self-serving, people they can tell they don't like it, and you're gonna potentially lose followers, but definitely not meet your goal of gaining followers and gaining trust.
I wanted to spend some time shifting gears and talk about the actual go-to-market itself, where a lot of founders are struggling between sales and marketing. Like sometimes it's like, oh, should I focus more on marketing now for the long term, sales for the short term? How would you suggest founders have a framework, in terms of like managing the balance?
Uh, One way to think about it is, again, it gets back to the problem you're solving. Is it a complex problem which requires complex selling? Is it a very simple problem? And therefore, mostly it's PLG. So depending on, right, if it's mostly PLG, then it's going to be, more marketing. But if it's a complex problem, you're going to eventually have to build a sales team. But when you're starting out, I definitely think marketing is important because people have to hear about your product first before you even, start selling. And research shows that 90% of a decision is made prior to talking to a salesperson. So something to consider.
There's also another aspect to consider is like this demand maturity question is, do people know they need your product and they're sort of coming to you, or it would be easy to come to you? And maybe then you need more the sales rep time, again, depending on complexity, but oversimplifying, maybe you need more of the sales focus to actually convert that demand once they find you into closed deals. Do they not know? You have to kind of go out and even inform them. Are they problem aware? Do you have to tell them why they need you, what the problem even is? That might be more of a marketing challenge. But I'd be interested, I don't know, maybe when we get to question time, if anyone has like a particular focus problem in mind where they're like, oh, do I invest more in sales? Do I invest more in marketing? Because I do think a really big trap I see with early founders is outsourcing what is actually a product market fit problem to sales and marketing. Being like, oh, we're going to hire a VP of sales and they're going to come in and solve all of our problems and sell so many deals. Really, it's like a product and a product market fit problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also would agree with what Katrina said, which is I think if it's an upmarket product that you're trying to sell and it's got a long sales cycle, high ACV, you probably want to index more on hiring for sales. If it's down market, if it's PLG, if you're building brand but it's more transactional, I would say in general, then you probably need to index more on marketing.
Awesome. That's so helpful. One last question from me before I open up the floor. So, how a lot of founders, and as I mentioned earlier, they struggle with getting their first customers. How would you recommend like a framework, tactics, anything like traps that could help them think about which channels to double down on first?
Usually, as early founder, early stage founder or startup, you don't have a lot of budget, right? So when I think about demand gen, I'm like, how do I get more distribution? So partnerships kind of work well, meaning like, you know, say you're targeting VPs of HR. Just, for example's sake, right? What other companies also target VPs of HR where they're solving a different problem, but the audience is still there? So I've gotten a lot of traction that way when I do partnerships at an early stage, and it's free, right? Because if you do a joint webinar, you're both, setting out emails to your respective audiences, your database, and then you just swap leads up.
I mean, I can tell you what I did. Like as a founder, I had two very divergent, very different ideas of like, these are things that I think are interesting and I think the market might need. I didn't even have a product at this point. Didn't have a website, didn't have a name, was using like a really dumb working name. It was literally Crocodile, had like no relevance to any of the products I was thinking about. And I was like, well, here are the people I know who might be interested in these things. And I just started having the conversations. It was sort of like pitching at the same time, asking them what they needed and like, oh, would this be interesting? And then as soon as I had, for me, it was three. That's not a magic number, but as soon as three people in a like span of a week being like, oh yeah, I would pay you $10,000 for that tomorrow. It's like, great, I'm going to do that. And that was my product. So it really was co-creation. Spun up a website, was like, well, shit, how do I actually deliver on this thing? I was like doing all this by hand. It was messy, right? But like, I think the theme that I always come back to is nail it and then scale it. And if you try to scale it before you know what you're even doing, it's like recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think, as I mentioned before, your network is huge as a channel for you, but I would say also additionally, social proof is your best channel early on. 1,000% lean in to your earliest customers who are willing to say great things about your products, your company, you as a founder, etc. Because people are like humans want to be able to know that they're investing in the right things. And any sort of technology decision is actually more emotional than you would think. And they want to feel like they are making the right bet. So really, really, I would say like if there's one thing to leave you with, as soon as you have social proof, that needs to be all over your LinkedIn. It needs to be all over your TikTok. You need to be doing speaking and be talking about, what you're doing with X customer and you're co-presenting with that customer and you're writing case studies. It is absolutely gold. So that's one thing to absolutely focus on.
That's super, super gold as an advice as well. I'll leave it open to the floor. Any questions? All right. I'm going to walk up.
Thank you very much. I'm Jose Moreno. I represent Media Copilot. It's a startup from Spain. It's a B2B for media production. We are expanding now to US, and I was wondering which challenge are we going to face compared to Europe?
So I've helped 3 founders launch, overseas in Europe, also named PJ. So I would say in Europe, you have to lead with a lot more validity. So for example, here, right, the press story can be about the product, the founder story, but I found that in many of the European countries, in order for us to get press, we needed 3 to 5 customer stories that, were willing to be public. So I've seen differences in terms of the social proof and the facts, being very fact forward was my observation.
I mean, I don't have a great answer. I think you're gonna have to find out, right? You will. But I have knowing some founder friends who have tried to sell into the U.S. market as a European-based company. I have heard one theme, which is that without a presence here, they found that and credibility. Going back to Nicole's point on social proof, they found that a little bit challenging to build the trust. So that might be like there's maybe a hack in just getting some early, straw man or like beachhead customers here in the U.S. If you don't already have them, you might.
My just quick add on that would be I think there's more relationship selling and relationship marketing. I think that happens in Europe as opposed to the US, partially because your digital laws are so much stronger in Europe. So it's like a force field that's hard to penetrate for marketers. So there's a lot more that happens that I would describe as ground game.
All right. Next question. Yeah. Next question.
Thank you for the time. So I'm in the very early days. I'm looking for my first design partner now. we are helping healthcare assistants to deploy AI with more safety and trust, helping them to unlock their AI adoption pipeline by helping them to automate risk assessment for AI. So that's kind of our business. We are talking to several hospital systems in the US, but we are finding hard to really, what will be the first problem, first pilot they will be willing to pay. So just tips on how to nail that and move this design partnership pipeline faster.
I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think you probably need a vertical marketer for healthcare. It's a very, very specific market. And if you're a marketer who focuses on that industry, you understand the ins and outs of how you market to them. I mean, I'm a big believer in sounds so old school, but it's totally true. Calculators. People love like a calculator where you can go and like calculate what's going to be saved from working with you compared to how much they're saving now. It can provide this like instant validation of your solution. So if you don't have that embedded in your marketing, I think it should be a core part of your asset stack.
I mean, I go back to my code creation comment and like what I haven't sold into healthcare, so like take it for a grain of salt. But what I did in like sort of your stage situation was just be friends with the people. Like it sounds funny, but just try to develop real relationships. And then they want to help you and you're trying to bring them value. And then you kind of scope together what the right scope, like looking at you through a geometric little lens here, try to scope what problem you can start with getting paid. I think you're smart to think like, what can they pay us for, as opposed to like, let me just give them all the solutions for free, where you get a little bit of a watered down signal. So co-creation.
All right, I think we are at time. I'm so sorry for the rest who couldn't ask questions, but definitely like email me after that. You guys have my contact earlier. I will just forward off to follow on with the speakers if you have more questions. Before I hand it off, let's have a round of applause for our panelists first.